I bet today, right now, ditching an airplane is the farthest thing from your mind. So stick with me on FlyWire and you're going to see why it might be worth paying attention to. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire, we're going to do the ditch. My early life as a fighter pilot, ditch meant a last-ditch maneuver, to get out of plane so the bad guy doesn't gun you. In the GA world, we don't have to worry about executing a proper ditch out of plane, so that's for another time. Today, we're going to talk about landing on water in a land plane. Not exactly an ideal situation. You can't really plan that. If you fly a multi-engine airplane, by the way, you think you might be immune from worrying about the ditch? Au contraire, my friend. There are plenty of multi-engine airplanes at the bottom of the sea. So what do you do if you become a statistic? Well, speaking of statistics, 92% of ditchings have less than 1 minute of warning, 28% have less than 15 seconds, and oh, by the way, about 500 feet, you have less than 30 seconds before you're on the water. Okay, wait a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. I think we have to know some stuff first, okay, before we talk about stuff like that. I think the first thing we have to know is the ditching characteristics of our airplane, high wing or low wing. It seems to make a difference. If you're high wing and you're fixed gear, you're invariably going to be flipping over, okay? Just about every one of them does. Not all, but Retract or fixed gear have their own issues, they really do. Retract is probably a little bit better. Low wing might be better as well. So I can't cover the techniques for all the airplanes out there, so what I plan to do is split this into a couple of videos. In this video, we're going to cover planning and the experience of ditching itself. And in the next one, we're going to take a closer look at what you need to survive, the tools you need, how to ditch, and what to do in the water when you're there, okay? In the final video of this series, at least my plan right now, we're going to talk with a fellow who ditched a DC-3 and everyone survived. This is way before Sully and the A320 and the Hudson. So ditching an airplane is probably one of the few maneuvers, that we can't really practice or train for. But that doesn't mean you can wing it. Yeah, pardon the pun, right? If you want to survive, you have to be prepared. And the biggest hazards are energy dissipation on landing and temperature control. So what can we do to mitigate these risks or those risks that we're going to face? Don't forget our main objective. Our main objective is to stay alive. Everyone on the airplane comes out of this alive. That's the plan. You got to keep your eye on the prize, and you have to have the will to survive. I can't stress that enough. Will is more important than just about anything else. Technically, we don't crash when we land on the water. We're doing a forced landing on the water, and I emphasize the landing part. This is the energy dissipation issue that I mentioned a second ago. Don't stall the airplane. In order to survive, we need to be available for search and rescue to find, and to do these things, we need a little preparation ahead of time. The thing to remember about water is that it's cold. I don't care if it's 80 degrees in the Bahamas or you're in Alaska and the water's, 30 degrees. If the water you end up in is going to be colder than your 98.6 degrees, then it's a problem. Heat will flow from you to the water, period. It's not business, it's not guessing, it's physics. The colder the water, the less time you have to survive in it. And I'm not just trying to shock you here. We're talking actual death, maybe by drowning first. This is a big deal. The risk is real, whether you're ferrying an airplane over the ocean or you're shooting an approach into an airport next to a river. What I'd like to do now is actually hear from a couple of pilots who experienced ditching for real, an unplanned swim that ended successfully, best kind. The first one is Steve Cox. He has a YouTube channel, Clear Direct, and I'm going to put a link below, so check it out. It's pretty interesting stuff. Steve was flying his V-tail Bonanza and was in the process of doing a low approach when he pushed up the throttle. Nothing happened. About 12 seconds later, they're in the water. The second one is Heidi Porch. She's a recently retired Airbus pilot who early in her career ended up ditching in the Pacific and getting rescued by a Russian refrigerator ship. Very cool stories. So let's join Steve first.
Took off from Troutdale, just planning half-hour flight, 3-hour tour, right? 3-hour cruise,
Right.
up the Columbia River, just to again stretch your wings, and because I was gonna do a longer trip the next day. Well, flying up the Columbia, we turn back around and I see a little auxiliary airfield that I consider, a good VFR divert, but I've never really landed there or done a low approach. So I said, hey, let's just do a quick low approach into this airfield. Beautiful day, nobody around, air was still. So I just did a little low approach into there. Won't get into too much of the details because NTSB is still finishing up the investigation of what happened. But suffice to say, at arguably one of the worst times to lose an engine, I lost my engine. Estimated 80 knots. Gear was up, flaps were coming up, probably about 150 feet above the end of the runway. So once again, to recap, I had done a low approach, pushed up the power, starting to go around, gear was up, flaps are coming up, and lost the engine. So I did a couple of immediate actions. My initial reaction is to fly the airplane, right? Aviate, navigate, communicate. So I'm flying the airplane, but I'm also saying, okay, we got to get this engine started. Stat. We don't have a lot of time. Do a couple of immediate actions, and I'm looking to the left, and that's bad options to put the airplane down in case I don't feel a kick in the pants of the engine coming back. That's all jetty, so this is on the south edge of the Columbia River. It's land, but it's not landable land. It's jetty, it's rocks, it's railroad. And out ahead of me was another kind of an outcropping of jetty and then a sailboat marina. Not super good. To the right, looked fantastic. Look, clear water. Nobody, no boats, no nothing. As I'm fiddling and scanning, something tells me you're getting slow. So I push. I don't know right now whether it was a flickering of the stall indicator or sound or what, but buffet on the jet. I don't know, or on the Bonanza, but I could tell I was getting slow, and it was time to push for airspeed. Push for airspeed simultaneously, unloading the wing a little bit, knowing that I can safely roll slightly to the right to get pointed towards good digable water. And once I got kind of in the right direction, it was time to flare. In that amount of time to steer just slightly to the right, I was unable to. I was starting to bring the yoke back to the left to level the wings. I was starting to level the wings. They didn't quite get level, but I was able to put the flaps to full. Who knows whether or not they had traveled much at all by the time we impacted the water, but I left the gear up. There was no time to brief Ani what was going on, or to have her pop open the door or anything like that. It was action, fly, flare, touchdown. It was a little bit more jarring than I would have expected. I couldn't feel any pain. You talk about the pat check after a post ejection kind of checklist, pat check. So you're not going to feel any broken bones at that point, or feel any impact. So looking for blood, looking for bones sticking out, don't see anything, and it honestly didn't feel that level bad. Okay, I look over and Ani's conscious, which is thank goodness, and she's talking. I say, "Are you okay?" Yes, she's okay. I see her trying to open the door. I immediately unbuckle my seatbelts. We had shoulder harnesses, which thank goodness, as well as headrests, which I didn't realize the benefit of headrests in a sharp deceleration. But your head's going to go back forward, and then it's going to go back again.
Right.
Regardless, had all that, but still had just amazing amount of whiplash. The egress, I'm starting to feel and see water enter the aircraft at way faster of a rate than I expected. And again, my obviously temporal time distortion, my brain's going fast and it seems fast too. So you can tell how quickly the water was entering the aircraft. I didn't anticipate this point. We've slowed, we stopped, I'm unbuckling and there's already, my feet are covered in water. She's struggling with the door. She's unstrapped though. I grab the door handle across her body. I rotate it, and thank goodness it just popped right open. Popped right open, and I say, "Do you have your phone?" "I don't know." "It's okay. It's time to get out. Get onto the wing." I scan for my phone. I don't see it anywhere, unfortunately. And I follow her out onto the wing. First kind of moment to go, whew, that was crazy. Thank God we're standing here on the wing. At this point, water's up to about my knees and rising very rapidly, about mid-thigh at this point, as quickly as I'm talking. There's a fisherman on the shore, an outcropping of jetty that I was talking about. This fisherman holding a big steelhead. It was beautiful. And I go, "Hey, nice trout." he goes, "Thanks." We look at each other, Ani and myself, and I go, "It's time to swim." And I kind of make sure she hops in and starts swimming okay. And I followed her. I swam in college and played water polo. And so I'm not super worried about myself. I'm just making sure that we get away from this aircraft as it's sinking pretty rapidly. But regardless, the water was flat and we were able to swim just fine. Estimated distance, 30 yards or so. Didn't feel like a lot of current until I saw that fisherman who was over here is now over here. And so I'm going, okay, we're going to miss that jetty if we don't pick up the pace. So we start swimming faster, and I tell her, "Hey, we got to pick up the pace because, Columbia River, we're going to be in, Astoria here shortly." So we make it to the rocks. We kind of stumble up onto the rocks, slippery rocks, and my hand feels a little bit weird. I go, "I think I broke my hand." And sure enough, my hand was broken, which is interesting because I did not feel it in undoing the latch on that Bonanza. And as you know, those Bonanzas take a little bit of force to open that lever. Kind of kiss the ground. I turn around. I look at my Bonanza. I'll send you a picture of this picture of pretty much what I see. Somebody's on the shore taking this picture, but pretty much the V-tail just unceremoniously sticking out the water, but it's going down, continuing to go down pretty fast. So regardless to say, a couple of good Samaritans were running up to us and kind of took us, I guess, into their care, if you will. I think there was a gentleman who was a chiropractor, so with some medical treatment, he kind of grabbed me by the neck and looked me in the eyes, kind of assessing for concussion or whatnot, and called the ambulance. And very thankful to those folks for whatever reason they're watching, but somebody came up with a blanket or a towel and put it around us. We weren't feeling cold at that moment. It slowly was settling in as our adrenaline started to fade a little bit, that we were a little bit chilly. But it was in May, and it was, wraps up the story. There wasn't a huge survival story. The biggest part is, just the flying to the impact, to the egress, to the swim ashore. Luckily, there were good Samaritans there. Neither of us had our phones. Who knows if that ELT, got a good signal up to the satellites or whatnot. In fact, it didn't even have a 406. So, and it was in a valley. Probably no pings off the ELT before it sank. So
that's a fascinating story, and you just don't have it just shows you don't have a lot of time. You you get out with what you have on you. Heidi has a great story to tell, so let's listen to her story.
Okay, well, the whole story takes about 3 hours to tell.
We don't quite have that much time.
I will encapsulate it, but this was my 9th crossing. It was a Cessna 182 fixed gear, and I was paired up with a 172. My boss was in the 172, and we were taking the planes down to New Zealand via Hilo, which is a little closer than Honolulu is to the mainland, and then Christmas Island, Pango, maybe Fiji, and down into New Zealand. So this was the first leg. It was flight planned for 17 hours and 52 minutes, 11 hours into the flight, and I noticed the oil pressure had gone from the top of the green arc, which was 60 PSI, and it was down to about 55, which is no big deal. You run the engines that long and the viscosity is going to thin out and you get a drop in oil pressure. About 20 minutes later, it was down to 50. And that's when I started thinking something is not quite right. So I called my wingman, Earl. I said, hey, I think I got a problem. We're still 6 hours from Hawaii.
Yeah.
So she said, what do you want to do? I said, well, I think I better call a mayday. You don't want to wait till the last second. So I got on the radio. We had HF radios at the time. I was talking to Honolulu and it said, I have a possible mayday, and which one of the Navy pilots overhearing it, he said, hey, you're either pregnant or you're not, you either have a mayday or you don't. They had heard there was a P3 Orion flying in the opposite direction. After I called the mayday, this P3 pilot called me on 120.15 and he goes, hey, did you just make a position report like 20 minutes ago? And I said, yeah. He goes, we just passed you. Do you want us to circle back and see if we can find it? Yeah, that'd be great. So they circled around. In the meantime, the oil pressure just very slowly reducing. While waiting for the P3 to try to find me, I could see contrails coming up overhead. So I tried calling them, and long story short, I finally got in touch with a Qantas 747. And I said, hey, could you do an S-turn for me so I could identify it? Yeah, no problem. So he did this S-turn. I said, that's you. You're almost directly overhead. So when he was right overhead, he gave me a lat long from his equipment. So I relayed that to the P3. Within 15 minutes, P3 had me in sight. And the engine was still going. I was talking to Earl, my wingman, about possible scenarios and what to do. And the first 10 minutes after calling the mayday, I was 1,000 thoughts were just running through my mind. It was, okay, I can't believe this is really happening. I should be doing this. I should be doing this, and after 10 minutes, it was driving me crazy. And I just decided, yes, you're going in. That's it. And it was like a light bulb went off and everything settled down. And it was almost like an out of body experience. I was kind of watching somebody else do it. And, I was cracking jokes with the guys and telling my boss I wanted a raise and all this. But we worked out a checklist that I asked him to read through for me so I wouldn't have to deal with trying to remember anything. P3 was there. I started a slow climb up to 8,500 feet. Normally we cross at about 6. Stowed everything I could. On the far side, there was 2 gas tanks, one behind the seat that ran across the fuselage, and then one where the right seat, passenger seat, is. So you're pretty much blind. I could only see straight ahead and out the left window. So my radios and I carried a 4-man life raft and some gear behind the seat, but it was pretty crowded, and decided that on the way down, I would open the windows and the door. Well, before the engine quit, there was a Coast Guard C-130 that had been dispatched to come out from Barbers Point. They were already airborne on another mission when they came out. The Coast Guard and the Navy are talking to each other. The P3 still could make California if they left right then. The Coast Guard was still 20 minutes out. So they're debating back and forth. Like, should the P3 leave and then the Coast Guard will come up on them or what? And finally, they said, Heidi, what do you want us to do? And I said, well, I know you guys want to get home, but I'd feel a lot better if you stuck around until the Coast Guard had me in sight. And so they said, no problem. So we'll do that. So Coast Guard, that's when the P3 shut the second engine down. So then the C-130 was there, and P3 went back to Honolulu eventually. So I've never had an engine fail on me in flight. And I expected there to be a lot of racket, a lot of noise, a lot of vibration. And I could almost sense like a surging, but it was so subtle, I didn't know if I was imagining it or not. And then all of a sudden, I just heard a tap, 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 tap. and that was it. And the oil temp never budged. I had always been told that the oil temp would go up and the oil pressure going down, and it never did. So fortunately, starting in gliders, I was very comfortable. It was just a big, heavy glider. P3 guys were up at 15,000 feet, so they had a much better view of the swells, and they gave me a heading to fly. The weather conditions were, it was 2 p.m, sunny day. I think the swells were maybe 2 feet and the winds were under 10 knots. So it was pretty much ideal. So they gave me a heading, and the P3 guys were telling me the safest thing for me to do would be to stall the airplane in. My biggest fear was that if I stalled the airplane the least bit too high, and you're not landing on a flat surface, I'd have no aileron control. One wingtip would probably drop lower than the other. One of the gear would hit and it would cartwheel. The forward gas tank was right here. And so my fear was that if it cartwheeled, I would hit the edge of that tank right along the side of my head and probably be knocked out. So I wanted to keep everything going straight ahead if possible. I had a 4-man life raft that I decided to put in my lap to use kind of like an airbag. And it had a lanyard you could pull out. And I tied that around my waist. Well, in order to have enough room to put it in my lap, I had to move my seat all the way back. So I couldn't reach the rudder pedals anymore. I couldn't see over the nose. I was too far back. I'm blind off the right. All I had was the left window. So there was no way I wanted to stall it in. So I decided to do a full flap landing just above the stall. That worked out really well. Once I hit the water, the mains hit and skipped, and the nose hit and grabbed, and then it just flipped onto its back.
Yeah.
But everything went in a straight line. I did gray out from the deceleration, and I believe the windshield blew out because it was not a process of the water coming in. It was just an explosion. And I remember as it was pitching forward, I remember hearing myself go, and in that breath, I had water. It came to a rest about a 45-degree inverted angle. And the sensation I had was that it was sinking like a rock. It wasn't. And my feet were probably above the surface. And I don't swim.
Yeah.
I can do the dog paddle and the side stroke, and that's it. And I've never been able to open my eyes underwater. Just, I can't do it. And so initially, there was this panic to get out. And I tried moving and I still had my shoulder harness on. So I ended that and noticed the raft was gone. Well, it had just gone out the door on impact, but I still had the lanyard, fortunately. But I knew there was a door on one side and a gas tank on the other. And so I just put my hands like this and started pushing, and this one hit the tank and this one hit the door. And I just started moving in that direction. I could tell through my closed eyelids that it was getting brighter. So I was probably underwater, maybe 15 seconds, I think, before I came up for air. The good thing about ditching a high wing airplane is with it upside down, now it's a low wing airplane. So yeah, I probably was able to get to air a lot faster than had it been a retractable and settled, because then I would have had to get out from underneath the wing. So I climbed up on the wing, and I had a Air Force issue life vest, the life preserver, and I pulled the tabs and nothing happened, which was a blessing. But I thought, well, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Get the raft. So I pulled the lanyard, pulled the raft to me, and it was the type where it had one tube and a floor. So it mattered which was right side up. So as it was opening upside down, and there was no way I was going to be able to correct it, because you got to hold these handholds on the underside and then flip the whole thing over onto your back. And I don't want to do that. So I was correcting it as it was inflating. I jumped into the water, dog paddled over to the raft, tried to get in. And every time I get about halfway in, I get pulled back into the water. About the third attempt, I looked down and that lanyard was a lot longer than I anticipated. And it was caught somewhere to the airframe. And so I would just get halfway in the raft and the slack would be taken up. So I got back on the wing, untangled my ankle, and now the raft is kind of drifting away a little bit. Jumped back in, dog paddled back over, took every ounce of strength I had to get into the raft. And if that vest had inflated, I wouldn't have had the leverage to get in. Well, it turns out I just hadn't pulled them hard enough, because once I was in the raft, I really gave them a tug and they opened. So someone was watching out for me, which is another story. I'm in the raft and now I'm thinking I got to get all my survival gear out of the airplane. The minimum was packaged in the raft, but I also had an Air Force flight helmet bag with all those pockets. And I had a flare gun and a radio and a solar still and food and you name it. And I was trying to maneuver. I didn't want to get out of the raft again because it was so hard to get in. So I was trying to maneuver back to the cockpit. I did not feel comfortable leaving the raft to swim to the plane when I didn't know when it was going to go down to pull out extra gear. I just stayed put. The planes were circling overhead and they were dropping smoke flares to check the wind direction because they were going to drop me supplies. And the Coast Guard ended up dropping 2 30-man life rafts tied together. The idea being you drop them upwind of your target, they drift towards you, you grab the rope, pull it, inflate one, and you got a spare. Well, being fearful of the water, I saw them drop and I thought, and I didn't have an oar or anything for paddling. And I wasn't sure I could get to them or not. And I thought, I'm okay where I am right here. So I think I'll just sit tight. And if they drift towards me, great. Well, when I got back to Honolulu, I had a phone debriefing with both the Coast Guard and the Navy. And the first question both of them asked me was, why didn't you go for those rafts? And I explained it to them and they both said, thank God you didn't, because we knew within 30 seconds you never would have made it. The current was stronger than the winds and it was drifting away. And they said, as soon as we saw that within 30 seconds, she's dead, that's it. And so they were absolutely shocked that I just stayed put. The P3 ended up going back to Hawaii, and then the Coast Guard stayed as long as they could, but they were running low on fuel as well. So they dropped some marker beacons. They went back to Hawaii, and then off and on during the day, there'd be more Coast Guard planes coming out. I was about 540 miles from Hawaii. You go through a lot of stages, just sitting there. I hesitate to say you're in shock, but because I was functioning, it wasn't like I was comatose or anything, but your mind, your body knows you've been through a crisis. And so it load sheds and it gets rid of all the stuff you don't need to deal with at the time, just so you can stay alive. So I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I was not emotional at all, which surprised me because I'm kind of an emotional person. And I was like, Heidi, you just ditched an airplane in the ocean. You should be like screaming or something and, just kind of neutral. And then you go through a stage like, okay, well, what's going to happen now? And, And then I got really mad because I started thinking of all the things I lost. And, you know, I'm going to have to replace all my credit cards and my passport and photos and all this stuff. And then for about 30 seconds, I screamed at the top of my lungs. And I don't know that anybody can remember doing that except when you were a child, you know? We might rant and rave, but absolutely screaming, no holds bars, you know. And then I felt good. And then it was just like, okay, well, long story short, I ended up being in the water about 9.5 hours. And the weather got continuously worse. And by midnight, I'd say the swells were probably about 13 feet. And about every third swell, little water would come into the raft. And I just had the heaving, but you know, fabric thing to, like a sea anchor, and you could also use it for bailing water. But I was always sitting in water. So, and I had some space blankets that were pretty much useless. They were that cellophane stuff. Well, it was windy and I was wet. So I was pretty miserable.
Yeah.
And then I saw more planes coming over. And then they started circling and dropping flares. And fortunately, there was a full moon. So it was pretty bright out there. I could have read a book by the moonlight. And then I saw this very bright light on the horizon, and a ship showed up and stopped. I don't know. It's really hard for me to judge distances, but you know, maybe half mile away. And their searchlights, they had 2 big searchlights up on deck, and they're searching. And all I had left packaged, you know, in the raft, I had 1 rocket flare and a signal mirror and a whistle. And I decided not to fire the flare until both searchlights were pointed in my direction. Because half the time I'd be on the backside of a swell and I couldn't even see this big ship. So I waited, I fired the flare, and the ships started moving away. And that was the worst of the entire incident, because I thought, they're leaving and in another half hour, I'm dead. I'm going to capsize, and that's it. And what was happening, what I didn't know and found out later, was that one of the airplanes, the Coast Guard planes going back to Hawaii after dropping a marker beacon for me, saw a ship. And he tried calling it on the radio, and they would not answer. And so he marked its location on his map. He went back to refuel. And well, he was done for the day, but he decided to come back out. So he refueled, found the ship again, flew across its bow and started dropping flares, which I guess is a maritime signal, emergency. So the ship turned around and for hours followed airplanes dropping a line of flares, because they could drop 3 or 4 and then they'd have to circle till it could catch up and then drop more, and then another plane would come and take over for them. The pilots were talking to an American ship that they got in touch with, and they told them where I was, but somebody was dyslexic and they gave them the wrong position. They were 20 miles south. The ship they were looking at and that they were leading was a Soviet refrigeration vessel. So that's why they weren't talking to it, because back then it was the Cold War and we didn't share frequencies. So the pilots were circling. They're talking to the American ship, which is 20 miles away, but they're looking at the Soviets thinking that's the American. So they're saying, turn to the right. She's right there. She's right in front of you. Turn to the right. Turn to the right. And finally they said, we just did a 360-degree right turn. We don't see her. And that's when they realized, well, you know, who is that? All I had left was my whistle. I heard the sound of a engine, a launch. I couldn't see it going to where the last flare had been dropped, which is bringing them right in front of me. And I thought, well, if I can hear the launch, maybe they'll hear the whistle. And I blew it so hard, I really thought I was just going to rip my cheeks open. And that's what they honed in on. And so they came, they threw me a line, I got into the launch. I didn't know who they were. They're speaking some foreign language. I finally gave up and I said, American. And they go, Ruski. And I went, oh, shit, oh no. Well, don't worry about it. You're safe, Anyway, I ended up being on their ship about 3 hours. And then during that time, they were able to get in touch with the American ship. There was one guy on the American ship that spoke Russian and one guy on the Soviet ship that spoke English. And they were able to coordinate a rendezvous. And I was transferred over. And then about 29 hours later, I was in Pearl Harbor.
What strikes me about both of these ditching events is that you just don't have much time, and you get out of the airplane with what you have on you, what you're holding on to, what's strapped to you. So even preparation isn't enough sometimes, as Heidi talked about. And that's the subject of my next video in this series, so stay tuned for that. I hope you like the video, and if you do, let me know by subscribing helps with the YouTube whole thing, so it kind of looks like that. And I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters up here. Without them, I couldn't afford to up my game to make better videos and cover more topics. And if you'd like to join, I'm going to put a link down below. And we do Patreon-only Zoom chats, and sometimes we have special guests. So early access, other stuff like that. So join us. Looking forward to it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire. Click this link for the latest upload. Click this link for whatever YouTube thinks you ought to watch. Or you can click this link to subscribe. Thanks for watching.